I get it, you're staring at a sea of specs and wondering if you're about to drop $2,000 on a machine that will sit half-idle most evenings, or if you'll finally have a desktop that can actually keep up with your workflow and the games you play on weekends. You don't want to waste money on a box that looks great on paper but turns out to be a bottleneck when you fire it up for the latest titles or for video editing sessions that stretch into the night. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon, so you can compare the numbers yourself before you decide. When I started digging into the HP Envy desktop, the first thing that caught my eye was the combination of an i9-14900K and a 64GB RAM kit. That's not a just good enough setup. It's the kind of hardware you'd normally see in a workstation that's built to handle heavy multitasking without breaking a sweat. The 2TB SSD gives you a massive amount of fast storage, which means you can install multiple modern games, keep a full Adobe Creative Cloud suite, and still have room for large raw footage libraries without constantly juggling external drives. The RTX 4060 Ti with 16 GB of GDDR6 also sits comfortably in the sweet spot for 1080p 1440p gaming, and it can push a decent 4K experience if you're willing to dial down ultra settings on the most demanding titles. If you're a gamer who usually streams on Twitch or YouTube, the i9's turbo boost up to 6 GHz makes a noticeable difference when you're encoding video while the GPU is rendering. I've seen streamers report that a CPU of this caliber lets them keep their stream at 60 frames per second while playing, without the dreaded frame drops that happen on mid-range chips. For a content creator who spends hours rendering 4K video, that extra CPU headroom can shave minutes off each render, which adds up over a week of work. On the flip side, if your daily routine is limited to browsing, office apps, and occasional media consumption, you'll probably never tap into that extra horsepower. In that case, you're paying a premium for performance you'll never need. The real-world setup experience is smoother than you might expect from a high-end desktop. HP includes a decent array of ports, a USB-C 5 gigabits per second slot that's handy for fast external SSDs, a couple of USB-A 3.2 ports, and a full Ethernet RJ45 jack for stable wired gaming. The built-in Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.3 mean you can get a solid wireless connection if you can't run a cable, though I'd still recommend the Ethernet for any competitive gaming where latency matters. Cable management inside the case is decent. The chassis opens up easily, and the pre-installed SSD is mounted on a toolless bracket, so upgrades are straightforward. However, the case isn't as spacious as some dedicated gaming towers, so you'll need to be mindful of future expansion. Adding a second GPU or larger cooling solution could be cramped. Now, let's talk about the practical strengths. The first thing you notice after booting up is how quickly Windows 11 Pro loads thanks to the 2 TB NVMe drive. Apps launch in seconds, and loading screens in games feel almost non-existent compared to older systems. The 64 GB of RAM eliminates any chance of hitting a memory ceiling, even when you have dozens of browser tabs open, a Photoshop project, and a game client running simultaneously. The RTX 4060 Ti handles modern titles like Cyberpunk 2077 or Elden Ring at high settings without dipping below 60 frames per second at 1440p, which is impressive for a card that sits in the mid-range tier. I also tested a couple of creative workflows. Rendering a 30-minute 4K video in Premiere Pro took roughly 20 minutes on this machine, which is a solid improvement over a typical 8-core setup. On the downside, the biggest hidden trade-off is heat. The i9-14900K is a power-hungry chip, and while HP supplies a decent air cooler, the system can get warm under sustained load. In a small office or bedroom where the case sits on a desk, you'll hear the fan spin up noticeably during long gaming sessions or heavy rendering. It's not a failure point, but if you're sensitive to noise, you might want to invest in a better aftermarket cooler or consider placing the PC in a well-ventilated area. Another practical consideration is price. This Envy model sits in the upper mid-range bracket, and you're essentially paying a premium for a combination of top-tier CPU, maxed-out RAM, and a decent GPU. If you're only interested in gaming at 1080p, a system with a slightly weaker CPU and the same GPU could shave a few $100s off the bill without a noticeable hit to game performance. Conversely, if you plan to dive deep into 3D rendering, AI workloads, or want to future-proof for next-gen titles, the extra CPU power could be worth the expense. So, who should buy this machine? If you're a serious gamer who also streams, a video editor who works with high-resolution footage, or a developer who runs multiple virtual machines and needs that extra headroom, the HP Envy desktop delivers a balanced mix of CPU and GPU muscle that feels future-ready.